What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved action heroes faces off against a talk show host who crosses every line imaginable? In just 17 seconds, Jimmy Kimmel managed to destroy years of goodwill and respect, pushing Sylvester Stallone to his absolute breaking point in what has become the most shocking celebrity walkout in late-night television history. Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live started like any other. The studio audience was buzzing with excitement as they waited for one of cinema's greatest legends to take the stage. Sylvester Stallone, the man behind Rocky Balboa and John Rambo, was supposed to be promoting his latest project. Instead, what unfolded was a masterclass in how not to treat your guests. The trouble began the moment Stallone walked onto the set. Usually, Jimmy Kimmel greets his guests with warmth and enthusiasm. But something was different this time. There was a coldness in his voice, a smugness that immediately put everyone on edge. "Ladies and gentlemen, Sylvester Stallone," Kimmel announced, but his tone suggested he was introducing someone he'd rather not have on his show. Stallone, ever the professional, smiled and waved to the crowd. The audience erupted in applause. They loved him. They respected him. Unfortunately, their host did not share those feelings. "Sly, thanks for being here," Kimmel said as Stallone settled into the guest chair. But before the Rocky star could even respond, Kimmel launched into what can only be described as an ambush. "So, I have to ask, and I think everyone's wondering this," Kimmel began, leaning forward with that signature smirk of his. "How does it feel to know that your best days are behind you?" The studio fell silent. Even the band stopped their usual background music. Stallone's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "Well, Jimmy, I'd say my best days are still ahead of me. I'm working on some exciting projects and I feel more energized than ever," Stallone replied, trying to steer the conversation in a positive direction. But Kimmel wasn't done. In fact, he was just getting started. "Really? Because looking at your recent movies, the box office numbers tell a different story. I mean, when was the last time you had a real hit? And please don't say the Expendables movies because, let's be honest, those were more like expensive home movies for you and your aging friends." The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the playful roasting they were used to seeing on talk shows. This was mean-spirited and cruel. Stallone kept his composure, though anyone could see he was getting frustrated. "Jimmy, I think you might be looking at the wrong numbers. The Expendables franchise has been incredibly successful worldwide, and I'm proud of the work we've done." "Worldwide?" Kimmel repeated mockingly. "Right, because American audiences have moved on from the whole tough guy act. I mean, you're, what, 70-something years old? Don't you think it's time to hang up the boxing gloves and the machine guns?" "I'm 77, and age is just a number," Stallone responded firmly. "I believe in staying active, staying creative. There are stories I still want to tell." Kimmel laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was condescending and dismissive. "Stories you want to tell? Come on, Sly. How many times can you play the same character? Rocky, Rambo, it's all the same guy with different names. Aren't you tired of being a one-trick pony?" The insult hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Stallone's jaw tightened, his hands, resting on the arms of the chair, clenched into fists. But still, he maintained his professionalism. "I think my characters have resonated with people because they represent something universal. The underdog who fights against the odds. The soldier who never gives up. These aren't just characters to me, Jimmy. They're part of who I am. Part of who you were, maybe," Kimmel shot back. "But let's talk about who you are now. A guy who's desperately clinging to past glory. Tell me, when you look in the mirror, do you see Rocky Balboa, or do you see an old man trying to recapture something that's long gone?" The question was so personal, so unnecessarily cruel, that several audience members actually gasped. Stallone looked directly at Kimmel, and for a moment, his eyes flashed with the same intensity that made Rocky and Rambo so compelling. "You know what, Jimmy? I see a man who's worked hard his entire life. A man who's overcome obstacles that would have crushed other people. A man who's created characters that have inspired millions around the world. What do you see when you look in the mirror?" It was a perfect comeback, delivered with the kind of quiet strength that made Stallone a star. But instead of backing down or showing some respect, Kimmel doubled down on his attack. "I see a guy who doesn't have to pretend he's still 25, Kimmel replied with a sneer. "I see someone who's honest about where he is in life. Unlike some people who keep making sequels to movies from 40 years ago because they can't come up with anything new." The atmosphere in the studio had become toxic. The audience was no longer enjoying themselves. They came to see their hero, not watch him get torn down by a host who seemed determined to humiliate him. Stallone took a deep breath, clearly fighting to maintain his composure. "Jimmy, I came here tonight to talk about my work. to connect with the fans who've supported me over the years. I didn't come here to be insulted." "Insulted?" Kimmel feigned surprise. "I'm just asking honest questions. Isn't that what journalism is about? Or would you prefer I just kiss your ring like everyone else does?" "I'd prefer you show the same respect you'd want someone to show you," Stallone replied, his voice steady but firm. But Kimmel was relentless. He sensed weakness and moved in for the kill like a predator who'd cornered his prey. "You know what your problem is, Sly?" Kimmel continued, his voice dripping with fake concern. "You never learned when to quit. Rocky should have stayed down in the first movie. Rambo should have stayed in the jungle, and you should have stayed in the 1980s where you belong." The words hit Stallone like a physical blow. His face went red, and for the first time since sitting down, he looked genuinely angry. But Kimmel wasn't finished destroying his guest's dignity. "I mean, let's be brutally honest here. Your speech is slurred, you move like you're made of concrete, and your face looks like it went 10 rounds with a cement mixer. At what point do you stop embarrassing yourself and just retire gracefully?" The studio audience was now completely silent. Some people were looking at the floor, too uncomfortable to watch. Others stared in disbelief at what they were witnessing. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was character assassination. Stallone's hands were shaking now, not from age or weakness, but from pure rage. He'd been insulted before. He'd been criticized, mocked, and written off countless times throughout his career. But this was different. This was personal, and it was happening in front of millions of people. "Jimmy," Stallone said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying more power than if he'd shouted. "I've been in this business for over 50 years. I've seen hosts come and go, I've watched comedians rise and fall, and I've learned something important about people like you." Kimmel leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying what he thought was going to be another opportunity to humiliate his guest. "Oh, really? And what's that?" "People who tear others down do it because they can't build anything themselves," Stallone replied. "You sit behind this desk every night making jokes about people who actually create things, who actually take risks, who actually put themselves on the line. What have you ever created, Jimmy? What have you ever risked?" For the first time since the interview began, Kimmel looked uncomfortable. His smug smile flickered for just a moment, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. "I've created one of the most successful talk shows in television history," Kimmel shot back. "I've entertained millions of people. I've interviewed presidents, movie stars, musicians. I think I've done pretty well for myself." "You've created a platform?" Stallone corrected him. "But what have you actually contributed to the world? What story have you told that mattered? What character have you brought to life that inspired someone to be better?" The question hung in the air, and Kimmel clearly didn't have a good answer. So he did what bullies do when they're cornered. He got meaner. "You want to talk about inspiration?" Kimmel said, his voice getting louder. "Let me tell you what's inspiring. Knowing when to step aside and let the next generation have their turn. Admitting that maybe, just maybe, the world has moved on from muscle-bound meatheads mumbling their way through action scenes." That was it. That was the moment everything changed. Stallone stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. The sound echoed through the silent studio like a gunshot. He looked down at Kimmel with a mixture of disgust and pity that was somehow more devastating than any angry outburst could have been. "You know what the difference is between you and me, Jimmy?" Stallone asked, his voice calm but filled with a quiet fury that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. Kimmel, suddenly realizing he might have pushed too far, tried to lighten the mood. About 30 years and a lot of plastic surgery?" But Stallone didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just stared at Kimmel with the kind of intensity that had made him a legend. "The difference is that I've spent my entire career trying to lift people up. Rocky wasn't just a movie about boxing. It was about never giving up, about believing in yourself when nobody else does. Rambo wasn't just about war. It was about honoring the people who sacrifice everything for their country. Every character I've ever played, every story I've ever told has been about finding strength in the face of impossible odds." Kimmel shifted nervously in his seat, clearly wanting this to end. "And you?" Stallone continued, pointing directly at his host. "You've built your career on tearing people down, on making others feel small so you can feel big, on laughing at people instead of laughing with them. That's not comedy, Jimmy. That's cruelty." The studio was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Camera operators, producers, audience members, everyone was transfixed by what they were witnessing. "Now hold on." Kimmel tried to interrupt, but Stallone held up a hand to stop him. "No, you hold on. You invited me here tonight, and now you're going to listen. I've been knocked down more times than I can count. I've been told I can't act, I can't write, I can't direct. I've been rejected by every studio in Hollywood. I've had people laugh at my dreams, my voice, my face. But you know what? I kept getting back up. Not because I was tough, but because I had something to prove, something worth fighting for. Stallone began walking toward the edge of the stage, and Kimmel realized his guest was actually leaving. "Sly, come on, sit back down. We're just having a conversation here," Kimmel said, his voice suddenly much more conciliatory. But Stallone didn't stop walking. "No, Jimmy, we're not having a conversation. Conversations require respect. This was an ambush. This was you trying to make yourself look smart by making me look stupid, and I won't be part of it." "Look, maybe I came on a little strong," Kimmel said, standing up and following Stallone. "But that's just my style. It's comedy. It's not personal." Stallone turned around one last time, and the look in his eyes was something that will be remembered forever by everyone who saw it. "Everything is personal when you attack someone's life's work," he said. "When you mock the things that define who they are. When you try to destroy their legacy for cheap laughs. You crossed a line tonight, Jimmy, and I'm done pretending that's okay." With that, Sylvester Stallone walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, leaving behind a host who had just learned the hard way that some people won't be pushed around. No matter how big your platform island, the audience sat in stunned silence as Kimmel tried desperately to salvage what was left of his show, but the damage was done. In just 17 seconds of pure cruelty, he had revealed his true character to the world, and it wasn't pretty.